Another crazy, insane adventure, this time to Jeffrey Epstein's private island, Little St. James.
But I never saw them.
So you would have made that connection because you stayed with him, you were a visitor, a guest on many occasions at his homes, and nothing struck you as suspicious?
Nothing.
During that whole time?
Nothing.
Our survey said...
We've come to Buckingham Palace in highly unusual circumstances. Normally, we'd be discussing your work, your duty. We'll come on to that. But today, you've chosen to speak out for the first time. Why have you decided to talk now?
Because there is no good time to talk about Mr. Epstein and all things associated. We've been talking to Newsnight for about 6 months about doing something around the work that I was doing. And unfortunately, we've just not been able to fit it into either your schedule or my schedule until now. And actually, it's a very good opportunity, and I'm delighted to be able to see you today.
Our survey said...
As you say, all of this goes back to your friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. How did you first become friends? How did you meet?
Well, I met through his girlfriend back in 1999, who, and I'd known her since she was at university in the UK. And it would be, to some extent, a stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends. I mean, we were friends because of other people.
And this is, someone that was extremely powerfully connected to presidents, prime ministers, royalty, and was able to evade law enforcement for some of the worst, most despicable acts in this world.
We now know that he was and had been procuring young girls for sex trafficking.
We now know that. At the time, there was no indication to me or anybody else that was what he was doing.
Our survey said...
The interconnectedness of Jeffrey Epstein is just absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, we're talking about billionaires, leaders, bankers, the most influential people who were on that island, and there was really no one else to verify it.
July of this year, Epstein was arrested on charges of sex trafficking and abusing dozens of underage girls. One of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Roberts, has made allegations against you. She described dancing with you and you profusely sweating, and that she went on to have possibly...
There's a slight problem with the sweating because
we were able to find out some other information about how this wasn't even that big of a secret on this island at all.
Yeah, talking to the locals, people have lived here for 20 years. They're like, oh, everyone knew. You just see the 12, 13-year-old girls waiting on the dock. They'd come get picked up, go to Epstein Island. So it's incredibly out in the open. And, people like Bill Clinton came here, 50 times? A huge amount of times.
I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time. And that was, yes, I didn't sweat at the time. Because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at, and I simply it was almost impossible for me to sweat.
She says she met you in 2001. She says she dined with you, danced with you at Tramp nightclub in London. She went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell, your friend. Your response?
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady.
Our survey said...
And I had a lot of opportunity to go to the United States, but I didn't have much time with him. I suppose I saw him once or twice a year, perhaps maybe maximum of 3 times a year. And quite often, if I was in the United States and doing things, and if he wasn't there, he would say, well, why don't you come and use my houses. So I said, that's very kind. Thank you very much indeed.
I'm like, okay, thank goodness I had, Jeff with me. And
It would have
then
been creepy to be there on your own because you just don't know what's there. We've heard so many things, and we're it's quite a big place with the mansion and the temple and all kinds of. There's a huge, what do you call it, sundial.
Yeah.
Very interesting. But it was kind of creepy because at first we didn't see anyone. It was like we even went into like offices and places, and nothing was locked. But it was like eerily weird.
A considerable stretch to say that he was a very, very close friend.
He was your guest as well. In 2000, Epstein was a guest at Windsor Castle and at Sandringham. He was brought right into the heart
Yes,
of the royal family at your invitation.
But a considerable stretch to say that he was a very, very close friend. Certainly at my invitation, not at the royal family's invitation. But remember that it was his girlfriend that was the key element in this. He was the, as it were, plus one to some extent in that aspect.
Our survey said.
Am I right in thinking you threw a birthday party for Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, at Sandringham?
pulling up, I was always a little bit skeptical because the grass was kind of taken care of. We also looked at the pool and we're like, the pool's also taken care of, so there's people there. And it's important to understand here is that this independent anonymous drone operator who's afraid to release his identity, who's flying the drones over there, captured Epstein's island with particular items in there that were swept between the federal government coming in.
No, it was a shooting weekend.
A shooting weekend.
Just a straightforward shooting weekend.
Our survey said.
But he had the most extraordinary ability to bring extraordinary people together. And that's the bit that I remember, is going to the dinner parties where you would meet academics, politicians, people from the United Nations. I mean, it was a cosmopolitan group of what I would describe as US eminence.
And this is, someone that was extremely powerfully connected to presidents, prime ministers, royalty, and was able to evade law enforcement for some of the worst, most despicable acts in this world.
I was patron of the NSPCC's Full Stop campaign, so I was close up with what was going on in those time about getting rid of abuse to children. So I knew what the things were to look for, but I never saw them.
So you would have made that connection because you stayed with him, you were a visitor, a guest on many occasions at his homes, and nothing struck you as suspicious?
Nothing.
During that whole time?
Nothing.
Our survey said.
We now know that he was and had been procuring young girls.
You have to remember that at the time, I was patron of the NSPCC's Full Stop campaign, so I was close up.
For sex trafficking.
If we went into the office and stuff, it's cleaned out. Like there's no evidence of anything. But the most interesting to me was the temple. And I heard a lot of people saying from this drone footage that it's not even like, it's like not 3D. It's like a flat wall that they made painted. Looks like it's like goods and all this stuff. So we went up and we checked, and yeah, it's just a flat wall. The door is painted on. And I have to say about the temple, he was a billionaire. I say was, he's probably still alive, but he is or was a billionaire. That seemed like the cheapest little temple I've ever seen. Like, why would you just paint? Like, I could have built that myself for about $5,000, I think.
And that's the bit that I remember, is going to the dinner parties where you would meet academics, politicians, people from the United Nations. I mean, it was a cosmopolitan group of what I would describe as US eminence. We now know that. At the time, there was no indication to me or anybody else that that was what he was doing. But he had the most extraordinary ability to bring extraordinary people together.
The most interesting things that I personally found were these like little satanic gargoyles with horns on their heads that were all over the property that were very creepy. I also found a chair that was completely made out of horns and looked like some kind of animal hide. That was very creepy and kind of very weird to look at. But other than that, we weren't really that successful because as we're going through our little mission, we're like, okay, the pool's taken care of. There's someone here. We got to be quieter. Luckily somehow I got service, and our good friend Joby Weeks called me. He was like, dude, there's a lot of people. There's people running all over. We just heard screaming. Are you okay? There's people going around in golf carts. Like, get out, get out, get out. And I'm like, crap.
At the time, there was no indication to me or anybody else that that was what he was doing.
Our survey said.
This is not, so this is something that has a lot of serious implications. There's a reason the guy who flies the drone around the island is anonymous. There's a reason, Epstein was able to evade any kind of justice for his horrible acts for decades and decades. There's a reason why this case is so significant, and yet the mainstream media just totally threw it out of the news cycle. I mean, this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. And we were there. We were also there at the helicopter pad, and it was even, reported previously before that Epstein would just get on his private jet, land at the St. Thomas airport, take a helicopter over so no one else would see him to do other things. There was air traffic control that actually came out and whistleblowed and said that he saw many small children going onto the helicopter, going onto the private jet. So, the severity of this case is still widely unknown.
But it would be a considerable stretch to say that he was a very, very close friend.
Was that his appeal then? Was that what because you were perceived by the public as being the party prince?
So many significant parts of this story, and the story is just erased from the mainstream media? No. The story can't be erased. This story can't be ignored, and it can't be ignored only if we start paying attention to it and start sharing the fact that this is still an open case. This is still a case that has a lot of serious implications, where we have royalty like Prince Andrew in the United Kingdom that are still running about free to do whatever horrible acts that they want to do.
She described dancing with you and you profusely sweating, and that she went on to have bath, possibly.
There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time.
Our survey said.
And that was, yes, I didn't sweat at the time because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at. And I simply, it was almost impossible for me to sweat. I don't know why I've collected that title, because I never have really partied.
But during these times that he was a guest at Windsor Castle, at Sandringham, the shooting weekend, we now know that he was and had been procuring young girls for sex trafficking. She described dancing with you and you profusely sweating, and that she went on to have bath, possibly.
There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time, and that was yes, I didn't sweat at the time because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at, and I simply, it was almost impossible for me to sweat.
The interconnectedness of Jeffrey Epstein is just absolutely mind-boggling.